Hello and welcome to Preparing for the Inevitable, how to detect and respond to cyber attacks. Now, this is a Wall Street Journal custom event brought to you by our sponsor, Netscout. I'm Philippa Layton-Jones, Global Editor-at-Large and Anchor at The Trust, the custom content studio and consultancy at the Wall Street Journal Barron's Group. Now, a few housekeeping notes, as is customary before we begin. We would love to have you participate in our audience Q&A, so please be sure to sign in to the box on the right-hand side of your video screen. We'll cover all the questions in the last 15 minutes of the session, and we'll be bringing all the speakers back on for those questions. If you encounter any difficulties, please take a look at our tech tips by clicking the small question mark on the top right of the site. Now, first up, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Eric Call. Dr. Call has been in the cybersecurity industry for more than 30 years and is on a mission to simplify complex technology issues and to make the world a safer place for business and individuals, but also for families. Dr. Call has worked with the likes of President Obama, Bill Clinton, President Obama, Bill Gates, and many other high-profile clients in both the private and public sectors. Dr. Call, thank you so much for being here today. It's lovely to have you here.
It's my pleasure, and thank you.
Great to see you. I'm going to jump right into questions. There's lots to talk about. So there's a core problem, isn't there, in our current approach to cyber. Investment is increasing in order to try and limit the damage from cyber attacks, but the costs of the attacks are still increasing. Why is that happening?
It's happening for several reasons. First, on the threat standpoint, what we've seen over the last 12 months is what I call the commercialization of cybercrime. Prior to that, you would see some small entities or nation state attacks launching various types of corporate espionage or others. Now we're seeing companies being formed, just like any other company, with the sole purpose focusing on targeting small, medium, and large organizations. So the amount of attacks are increasing. And then on the defensive side, the problem is companies are still under the false illusion that attacks can be prevented. So they're increasing spending on prevention, but the problem is we need to put more energy and effort on the detection side of the house.
Okay, so you're saying effectively that cyber attackers aren't necessarily as sophisticated as we like to think they are, but perhaps our focus is in the wrong place. How are they so successful if they're not so sophisticated?
The reason why they're so successful is we're making common mistakes and not fixing the easy foundational items. If you look at most of the large data breaches that we've seen out there, it comes down to a server being accessible from the internet, missing patches containing critical data in which the key is not properly protected. So the big areas that we're missing is we're not focusing on configuration management, hardening of the systems, and securing of the data. And we're going in and only partially accomplishing that. And even if a company has 90% of their servers patched and 90% of their data protected, that still leaves 10% exposure. And that 10% is exactly what the adversary is going after.
And so do you think, just to dig into that a little bit, are hackers aware that that's the situation that's sort of afoot in many organizations they're hacking? Are they sort of cognizant of the shortcomings and that's exactly where they're exploiting? It might seem like an obvious question, but does the shortcoming of the sort of the CISO approach, for example, give them a sort of targeted opportunity to go in and make their attack?
It absolutely does, and it's a little ironic because what's happening in most organizations and overall in cybersecurity is the cyber attackers are more aware of companies' visibility and exposures than the company is. A real quick example is we recently were able to go after and catch a cyber group and they created network diagrams of target companies that they were going after. And when we compared the adversaries' network diagrams with the company's own network diagrams, the adversaries' network diagrams were more accurate and complete than the company's own network diagrams. So the real issue is the adversaries are doing their homework and have better awareness of our exposures than companies do themselves.
Okay, so it sounds like the hackers are in fact being very smart. But can you go into some detail here of what does the typical hacker look like today? Is this a code whiz in a basement somewhere like we usually think of, or how would you characterize them?
The scary part is they look just like me and you. They're employees in a lot of cases. We're seeing like RBN, the Russian business network. This is a corporation in Russia that has a building. They have a logo. They have employees. Those employees get salaries. They get benefits, except unlike us, in which we're going in and either providing services or securing organizations, their sole business model is to break in, compromise, and steal data for monetary gain. So it's no longer what you see in a lot of Hollywood movies where you have these geeky kids overdosing on energy drinks and drinking and eating Twinkies all day long. It's business folks, technical folks, and this is their job. Their job is to create code that finds weaknesses and exploits those for monetary gain.
So it sounds like we, or at least you, know quite a lot about the profile of a cyber attacker here, and that's really important, right? How they're evolving and how they're changing. How can, and this might be a somewhat controversial question, but can organizations make use of that hacker skills somehow? I know in the past, we've sort of all talked about how, you know, private businesses could perhaps bring in hacker talent because they were staying one step ahead of the kind of, you know, grown-up organizations, if you were. Is there something to be learned from the hackers? Is it too controversial to sort of go down that route? Or would you give us your thoughts on that?
To me, cybersecurity, to be very, very effective at the defense, you need to understand the offense. If you don't know how the offense works and how the offense operates, you're never going to implement effective defensive measures. And that's what we're really seeing today, is this disconnect where companies are increasing budget, they're increasing resources, and they're building all these defensive measures, but the attackers are exploiting these weaknesses that the company's not aware of. So learning from the offense is definitely something that's critical and needed. However, I don't think you actually need to hire or bring on hackers, because the exposure points that we're seeing today are fairly obvious and consistent across organizations. We need to recognize that the goal of cybersecurity is not to prevent all attacks. That's impossible. The goal of cybersecurity is timely detection and response and visibility. So we can hire all the hackers we want to tell us that our systems are vulnerable, to tell us that we're missing patches, to tell us that our configuration management is not where it needs to be. But that's not going to ultimately help us if we don't have the visibility to catch attacks early, respond, do trace back to the root cause, and minimize the overall damage.
You talked there about the goal of cyber detection, and I just love to dig into that a little bit more. When you're really trying to sort of unpack what this looks like, can you give us almost the sort of setup of, if there is such a thing, the ideal scenario in cyber detection, cybersecurity?
Absolutely. So the first thing we need to do is answer a simple question, which at least seems simple, but it's not as simple as most people think. What is the definition of cybersecurity? And it's funny because I talk to a lot of people and I ask that question. You know the word cybersecurity, we've all heard it, but give me a clear-cut definition, and most people can't. So the definition of cybersecurity, it's all about understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So when we're talking about detection, we have to recognize that in cybersecurity, we're accepting a risk. So we have to always go in and say, what is the value or benefit of doing something? What is the risk and exposure? And is the value and benefit worth the risk? Most companies fail to evaluate the risk of decisions they're making. So the first approach in defending against cyber attacks is to make risk-based decisions. And if the risk is too great, don't implement that feature. Then once you accept the risk, we then want to go in and say, where is our critical data? What is the information that if it was compromised would be detrimental to our business? And that's what we need to monitor and focus on. And here's the trick. Most companies focus on inbound prevention to try to stop the attacker. And that's very hard and very difficult. And we've seen it doesn't work. What works is outbound detection, is looking at what's leaving your organization, having tools that can correlate and analyze that information and be able to spot those anomalies in a timely manner to control and minimize the data leakage.
Outbound detection, I would love to just, because that obviously is the key here. Can you just go into a little bit more detail of what can you teach our audience about outbound detection?
So when we look at real damage to a cyber attack, real damage to a cyber attack occurs when somebody exfiltrates data from your organization, when somebody sets up what we call an outbound command and control channel, which is a way adversaries can connect with your system. It's when they go in and communicate with outside adversaries. All of the damage that occurs mainly happens with outbound traffic, what's leaving your organization. Many companies just blindly allow anything out of the organization. So they're carefully controlling what's coming in, but they're not looking at what's leaving. And this is a paradigm shift in cybersecurity, but a very powerful one. I'm not saying ignore the inbound traffic, because most companies have firewalls, have IDS, IPS, they have basic measures for doing that. That is what it is. In order to go to that next level, we have to look at the outbound traffic, what's leaving our environment. And there's some real easy things to do. One of my favorite tricks is take a map of the world and ask the executives, where do you do business? So whatever countries or areas of the world you do business in, we make green. Whatever areas of the world you're not doing business in, we make red. Then I take your outbound traffic and I automatically map where all your outbound traffic is going. And the thicker the line, the more traffic. And in almost every case when I do this, for small, medium, or large size organizations, 60% or more of their traffic is going to red countries or countries in which they're not doing business. And that's the problem. We have the data, we have the information, we're just not using it to make smart and better decisions in cybersecurity to protect our organization.
That's fascinating. Two quick follow-ups there. When you do that map exercise, how has the hybrid or remote work environment complicated or compounded that? Has it at all? How has it made it look different?
For the most part, it really hasn't changed significantly, because we find in most situations that people are living close to where the offices are. So for example, I have a business in Virginia and most of my employees live in Virginia. So if we switched from a remote workforce, all of a sudden they might be slightly outside the area, but they would still be within that same state, region, or country. So the remote workforce hasn't really changed that outbound mapping, but what it has done is greatly increase the attack space of adversaries. I always love asking companies, how many new offices did you open up over the last 2 years? And most clients look at me going, Eric, we haven't opened up any new offices. We've shut down most of our major offices. And I said, let me ask a different question. How many people are now working from home that weren't previously working from home? And with one of my clients, they said, we have about 2,000 employees, so 2,000 people. I said, great. You just opened up 2,000 offices in the last year. Now, normally when a company opens up an office, all those appropriate measures that are needed, But in this case, we rapidly overnight opened up 2,000 new offices that have no security, no control, no protection. So now where do you think the adversary is going to target an organization? The remote workforce. So we've basically over the last 2 years increased our exposure points exponentially.
Quite right. And given that that's not a situation that is necessarily going to go away in whole or in part, it might turn to a hybrid scenario. Does that require a big shift in cybersecurity thinking as we enter this sort of new paradigm of hybrid work?
It not only requires a big shift in cybersecurity, it requires a big paradigm shift in IT and how we set up our infrastructure. Most organizations' IT infrastructure and related security was based on people being in a specific office, being in a location. You look at many clients, when you're in the office, you're behind 5 or 6 different levels of security. When you're surfing the web, 7 or 8 different devices are filtering and checking your email. And now all of a sudden, when we're working from home, that all goes away. So the big thing that organizations and executives must be thinking about is how do we create and design a location agnostic environment? How can we create an environment that it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in the office, whether you're at home, whether you're in another country, you still have the same level of security, you still have the same level of controls, and you still have the same level of visibility. And that's something, that location agnostic piece is not something that security or IT departments have typically thought about.
And I want to come back to something else you said earlier, which was, it's about recognizing your critical data and protecting that. How good are companies at knowing what is their critical data, at being able to isolate it, even recognize that it exists?
I would say most organizations in knowing and protecting their critical data would get a very solid B+ or A-. Now, that might seem like a pretty good score when you're in school if you were taking an advanced class like physics or calculus. But the problem of a B+ or A- is if you're focusing on 85 to 90% of your data, that leaves a 10 to 15% exposure that's being targeted. And here's the problem. If I go into most clients and say, what is your critical data? They can answer it. They have a really good idea of what the data is. Then if I ask them, where is it located? They will go in and say, oh, it's located on these 4 servers. Once again, doing a great job. The only problem is, in addition to these 4 servers, it's also on 3 additional servers. And it's the 3 additional servers that they're not aware of that's really creating that big exposure. And just to put it in a slightly different light, another way to think of a server is a client, desktop, or laptop. We've talked about remote workforce. Let's step back and think about what we did. We give every individual a laptop, which today is really a portable server, that has a 3 to 4 terabyte hard drive. And we let every one of them store 4 terabytes of data at their home. There's no way any organization can be able to keep up with, correlate, or analyze all that data. So now what happens is an adversary or an attacker doesn't have to break into your corporate servers. All they have to do is break in to a portable server or a laptop, and they get all that information. That's why, to me, one of the big paradigm shifts that has to be done so we can really get our arms around this problem is for people working at home and endpoint solutions, we have to remove the hard drive. We have to move back to thin clients. So now all of our data is on centralized servers that we control and manage. But as long as users have 4 terabytes and can store data anywhere, anyplace, anytime, we're never really going to be able to tackle this problem.
So given everything you just said, looks a sort of a little bit scary in that sort of, A- environment. What percentage of companies do you think have suffered a cyber attack in the last 12 months?
I would say, to be fair, because if I said 100%, everyone would throw darts at me and say, you can't prove that. So just to be as scientifically accurate as possible, I will go in with a very, very, very safe number of 90%. The thing we have to remember is, and this is the scariest part, most organizations, when they're breached, they do not detect the breach for 28 months on average. Now, some do it sooner, some do it later, but this is over 2.5 years on average. So I have people always come back and say, oh no, Eric, I can find 100 companies and they will all say they've had no breach. And I'm like, that doesn't mean they haven't had a breach. That just means they haven't detected it. And the real challenge or issue is this: the tools and solutions that most organizations have are not focused on detecting attacks. They're not focused on detecting compromise. They're focused on preventing and stopping attacks. And when they don't, there's little left in place to protect them. So asking a company of whether they're compromised or not, or whether they've had a breach over the last 12 months, isn't really a fair question to ask them, because they don't have the visibility to answer the question correctly.
So let me get this straight. On the one hand, cyber attackers perhaps aren't as sophisticated as we perhaps give them credit for, though what you said earlier is perhaps we should give them a little more credit. On the other hand, almost every company out there has been attacked in the past year, and this is in spite of increases in cybersecurity spending and a much greater awareness at the sort of C-suite and board level that cybersecurity is something that needs investment and attention. How does this not add up to a massive failure by the cybersecurity industry?
Since I work in cybersecurity, let's use the word learning experience instead of failure, because as long as you learn from something, you're moving in the right direction. But no, you hit the nail on the head. Is what we are doing is not working. We need a new approach. And that's why many of the things like thin clients, focusing on detection, are really the way that we need to go and move, because what we're doing is we keep doing the same thing. And it's almost Einstein's definition of insanity if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? So companies are going in and buying more advanced technology, AI enabled, right? That was the biggest one at a recent security conference. Anybody that was AI enabled, everyone was buying it up. The issue is, whether it's AI enabled or not, if it's preventive and it's not focused on the detection and the correlation and the analytics, it's not going to solve the right problem that's really out there. So we need to go in, step back and say, okay, moving forward, our focus needs to be on how do we get better visibility? How do we get better insight into what's happening? How do we use the IT data and information that is readily available to us to be able to correlate, analyze the attacks? Because the good news is, as we said, yes, there are advanced adversaries. However, most of the attacks they're doing today are not very advanced. But here's the real thing. There's no such thing as an invisible adversary. There's no such thing as the ghost in the darkness. If somebody breaks in to your environment, they're leaving trail. They're leaving breadcrumbs. So if we could go in and take that information like network usage, CPU usage, memory usage, these are all breadcrumbs that are left by the attacker. And we can start using that information to correlate, analyze, and instead of prevent an attack, detect it in a timely manner, everything starts to change very, very quickly. So the good news is there's solutions out there. The bad news is many companies are not fully embracing them.
So the issue at hand is really the changing threat landscape, as you say, but then also the changing detection methods like network usage, right, which seems very important there. Can you just go into a little bit more detail on that network usage and its usefulness in detecting cybersecurity threats or attacks?
Sure, absolutely. It's such an interesting area, because if you look at all the major breaches that have happened over the last 24 months and pick any one of your favorite that you've read about in the news, even though these companies have spent millions of dollars on cybersecurity tools, almost every one of the attacks was detected by what we call an IT anomaly. It wasn't actually the security tools that detected the attack. What happened was all of a sudden, one of the servers that normally runs at 60% utilization now peaked out at 100%. Or one of the networks that normally is very fast, all of a sudden is very slow and sluggish. And somebody from IT went in and said, what's going on? And when they investigated it, they said, there's something weird happening, something malicious. And that's how they caught the attack. So if most of the attacks we're detecting because of IT performance issues, wouldn't it be great if we could take that IT performance data and use it as a security detection tool? Essentially go in and say, okay, if our systems normally run at 60%, if they peak to 90%, let's investigate. If our network is normally running at a 20% utilization and within 2 hours it peaks to 60%, let's investigate. Now, all of a sudden, by using IT data combined with security tools and methods, we can now get an early detection method to be able to catch these attacks quicker and sooner. Because let's face it, if you get attacked and you catch the attack within 5 minutes and knock them out of your network, I'll take that every day of the week. What causes the significant damage, the 500 million records, is because somebody broke in and it took them 3 years, not 3 minutes, to detect the attack. So it's all about increasing the visibility and time to detect, to control damage and minimize impact.
Okay, so talking broad strokes here, how should companies change their approach when they're thinking about cybersecurity?
A couple ways. One is they should start making sure that a certain percent, a significant percent of their budget is focused on detection. So when we work with our clients and they come to me and say, Eric, there's this new solution or new product that's coming out, should we buy it? My first response is, which category? Is it prevention or detection? And if they say prevention, I say, aren't you doing a good enough job on prevention? Shouldn't we be focusing more of our energy on detection? So the first critical thing is any new tools that you buy or implement must be detection based. Second broad stroke area is you want to have integrated tools with IT. Security does not run in a vacuum. Security is not run in isolation. We need to have IT information and data and statistics in order to make better decisions. So the second broad stroke is make sure we're focused on IT integration with our security tools on detection. And then the last piece is make sure that we're also wrapping those solutions around our critical data to make sure that if somebody accesses, manages, or tries to extract our critical data, we have the visibility to respond and react.
And what should CISOs be talking to their leadership teams about? Because I know, as I referenced earlier, that was a tricky conversation in the early days. Seems to have moved a long way on, and we know how important CISOs are. But do they need to change the way they're presenting this information or the way that they're assessing the cost of an attack? Are we in fact good enough at assessing the cost of an attack to really sort of grab the attention of the sort of the leaders of organizations who are ultimately responsible for the buying decisions?
But the biggest failure that I see with CISOs, chief information security officers, is they don't speak the language of business. They are technical people that speak technical language. Business executives don't understand techie. They don't understand techie talk. So if you go into your executives and you start talking about false positives and correlation and behavior, it goes way over their head and they're not going to want to meet with you. World-class CISOs speak business language. They go into the executives and they talk how to make cybersecurity a business enabler. They're going to go in and basically present the option, say, listen, we can keep doing what we're doing today, and we have an 80% chance of being compromised. Or we can spend $2 million and reduce that risk by 60%. That's the language we need to speak. So we need to have CISOs that are world-class translators that can take the technical language take all the technical mumbo jumbo and translate it to a business strategy and communicate that to the executives. Because I will tell you, if executives had better information that they understood, they would make better decisions in cybersecurity. But almost every CEO and COO that I talk to go, Eric, I'm scared about cyber. I'm terrified about cyber, but I don't understand it. Nobody is talking in my language and explaining cyber in business terms.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Cole, brilliant insights. Thank you so much for this interview. I think we've probably all learned an awful lot. I'm going to say goodbye in a second, just temporarily, but we'll see you back here in a few minutes for our audience Q&A. We'll be bringing Dr. Cole back on. And before I go, I'd like to introduce our next session and invite Anil Singhal, co-founder and CEO of Netscout, to take the stage. Anil, over to you.
Thank you, Philippa, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I hope you found a conversation with Eric very interesting and maybe even inspiring. And I bumped into Eric about a year and a half ago when he was working on his book on cyber risk. And we had a connection on how to address this thing based on some of the things which has been done by Netscout over the last 10, 15 years, certainly throughout our history, and which was related to how do you use performance-based information to really detect anomalies and do early detection. So before I talk about that, the solution which we have brought to market a few months ago, I'll just give you a brief introduction to Netscout. So I co-founded Netscout over 35 years ago. And as a product company, we have been operating for more than 30 years. We went public in '99 on NASDAQ. And we have over 2,500 employees. We operate in 50 countries, meaning we have customers and operations there. And our revenue is roughly around $850 million. About 80% of that is what I call performance management, IT performance management, both for carriers and enterprises. And remaining 20% or 25% is DDoS cybersecurity. And all this came about with a combination of experts and many acquisitions over the last 20 years to create this new Netscout. And so what is unique about today or this, sometime you come up with new ideas during crisis, and COVID was a crisis. We came up with some new ideas, and we found that Netscout has the data to enter a new adjacency, which we are defining called omnisecurity. And by using the best of our assets and talent and patents in both the cybersecurity area for DDoS, as well as on the service assurance. We work basically, we have a carrier scale, enterprise scale solution already in both these areas. We are the #1 player by a wide margin, but yet we were not using some of our technology and solutions to go deeper into the security space, deeper into the cybersecurity space. So with that led to our thinking of launching this new solution, which took about 18 months to develop. And it normally would take many companies 4 or 5 years. But as I mentioned, we use a lot of the assets which we use for IT performance management to deliver this. So the difference between our solution and all IT performance management solution is we use DPI as the source for looking at IP performance management problems. And whereas we don't use other network intelligence, we use packets, we use DPI. And we said, why don't we use DPI for omnisecurity also? And it's like we were already doing the blood test on blood samples, which is I call packets, and DPI on that for health monitoring. Why not use it for DNA evidence also? And that led to this solution. And if you can go to the next slide, I'll briefly go over that before we take on your questions. So if you look at the big picture challenges for cybersecurity, we talked about it during the earlier session, that people are solving problems, but the risks are going faster than the investment people are making. So every $10 we spend, we still have $11 of risk. And that's because the hackers are ahead of us. They have visibility, as Eric mentioned, into our activities, the network of the customer, but we don't have visibility into hackers' activities, even though they're operating on our network. And so we said the problem to be solved in this industry, which is the risks are going high because we are not doing timely detection of threats. We don't have the contextual evidence. We get false positives because we don't our detections are based on just fixed signature sometime and all those things. So we said this is the problem we're going to solve, and that will then address all the issues of too few security staffs or added budget or costly breaches. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So our goal is that if we can do this timely detection of threats to what we call smart detection, that's a term we have coined based on a few patents we have. And that is going to be possible by continuous visibility and monitoring of all traffic at key vantage points in your network. What are those vantage points? Where all the traffic between server and clients aggregates. There are clients, meaning end users, as well as hackers. And if you can provide visibility continuously in real time and use that as the basis for detection, then we have a real possibility of bringing down not just the risk, but actually your budgets. And that's what we set out to do. And we introduced this solution called Anomaly Cyber Intelligence. If you can go over that, I can introduce that with just what are the key pillars of this solution on the next slide. So we have defined smart detection in action as 4 key things. One is advanced early warning, because before attacks become really damaging, there are early indicators of that. Eric talked about CPU utilization. Well, you may not even have to sometimes look at CPU utilization. You know the server is busy when it's responding slowly, if it's getting too many errors. We do all these things in our IT performance management solutions, but we have not applied that in the past for cybersecurity use cases. So advanced early warning system is one of the pillars. Second one is continuous attack surface monitoring and discovery of that. So how a discovery is being done, as Eric mentioned again, a customer says, I have these 4 servers, which has all my good data. Well, how do you know that 4 server has not become 5 or 6 or 7, how well they're distributed? So you have to dynamically discover the attack surface, not statically specified, because in this digital transformation, with all kinds of changes going on, it's impossible to keep track of that. So continuous attack surface discovery is the second pillar. Third one is we use the term contact tracing because of what's happening in COVID time, is that when somebody gets infected or somebody gets attacked, or whether there's a lateral movement, then how can you figure out who else that person was talking to at what time, with what intensity, and what were they exchanging? And that then helps in the exfiltration and other area. And lastly, very important, we recently had this Log4j virus malware discovered. But that doesn't mean it was not around in your network for a long period of time. So how do you go back in time and at scale and speed and see how long this infection was there on your network? So we have some technology which allows you to go back in time without keeping every single traffic packet on your disk. And that creates a very highly scalable solution. So with that in mind, we look at, there is a prerequisite to doing this is continuous visibility by looking at network traffic, packets, and all those, continuously applying DPI at scale to produce some metadata, which we call ASI, which is Netscout secret source, adaptive service intelligence. You can go to the next slide. So adaptive service intelligence, which I mentioned, is composed of many patents, and some of them was done in response to IT performance management. Is basically a set of metadata which we have created, which has all the signal but very little of the noise. So if your traffic rate is 100 megabits per second, the metadata is roughly about 1 megabits per second. So this allows us to go back in time, do real-time detection, create early warning indicator, and all that adaptive session is technology which has been verified at big carriers in the world, Fortune 500 companies, for our traditional use cases of IT performance management. Is now we are bringing it to the cybersecurity world. And we already have quite a few customers right now, existing customers who are signed for it. And I think this will also result in the cooperation of NetOps and SecOps. So I'll skip the next slide because we need to leave the time on Q&A. Or happy to answer questions later on through our team and any specific detail of the solution. But I wanted to highlight that we are doing something. Philippa asked that, what is the difference? And I wanted to concentrate on the difference. We are using completely different approach. Either this approach has not been tried, or it has been tried by very small companies who didn't have the scale and the expertise of Netscout. And that's why I'm very excited about working with Eric and our team and our customers, and hopefully have an interaction with you later on. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Anil. And I'm thrilled to be joined back by Dr. Eric Call and Anil himself, as well as Netscout CEO, Enterprise CEO, Paul Barrett, to answer some questions from the audience. Now, if you haven't submitted and you still have questions to ask, please use the box to the right-hand side of the video screen. I'm going to get started. We have quite a few questions already. And the first one is something we talked about already, Dr. Cole. So I'm going to ask Anil and Paul for this perspectives on this one initially. The remote workforce has changed the outbound mapping exposure. How do you protect these new endpoints outside the office perimeter? Anil, do you want to start with that one?
Well, I'll add to what Eric was saying, that this has not dramatically changed the situation. Maybe things got slightly worse, but your assets have not really moved. Your assets are still sitting in the same places, and those are the ones you need to protect. Yes, you have remote workforce, you have more digital transformation, but if you can, your attack surface is really on the other side. Usually the servers and your other network infrastructure assets are more important. So we are using a different approach than endpoint, which may complement or replace endpoint based stuff. We are trying to look at the impact of lateral movement and other things from endpoint. And so we believe that our solution works similarly for remote workforce versus remote sites. Only difference is we have one person in that remote site versus 6 or 7 people. And we have some other ways to get access to information which are generated from endpoint through another solution we have in the IT management area, which we call smart edge monitoring, which allows us to get access to what endpoints are doing. I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been in this situation with far more people working from home for getting on for 2 years now. And I think people are getting better at it. Eric described one solution, which is thin clients. People are deploying solutions such as SASE. I think you really need to think about ultimately, whatever the entry point, what are the attackers going after? And they're going after information stored on critical servers. And that's where, we really have a very strong role to play in detecting people getting to those critical assets and starting to try and exfiltrate that data.
Excellent. I'm going to move on. And I think this one is one to start with you, Dr. Cole. And this is from Janie Gregg. As educators, what can we do to train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals to be more prepared?
Oh, that's an amazing question, and love fellow educators, because it's all about passing on the knowledge. To me, what it's really about is teaching them the holistic lifestyle of cybersecurity, where how an attack works. So it starts with initial reconnaissance, then we do some detailed scanning, then we do exploitation, then they break into a pivot point. Then from a pivot point, they then go in and do lateral movement deeper in. They then access the critical server and they set up a command and control channel out of the organization. And then once they understand that holistic life cycle, then show them each step. How do you prevent, detect, and control each of those areas? Because the problem is we have a lot of cybersecurity professionals that are very niched in one area, and world-class security professionals need to understand the entire process.
Excellent. Anil, could I?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Same question to you, Anil. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah. I just wanted to use a phrase which I've discussed with Eric and Paul and also talked about it, is that you really need to be vigilant during peacetime also. Because when it comes to cybersecurity, there is no such thing as peacetime. And that's the key thing. So how do you do that? You always monitor. You always provide continuous visibility and smart detection. And that's the key. If I have to make one big change in the industry, that would be that instead of working on mitigation, which is sort of at the tail end, and if you do that, you may never get to tail end. Sometimes it's easier to catch a thief than to catch their act. And if you can do that, if you can do that, then it doesn't matter what act they're going to do, because we stop all acts. So that's what I would add. What we could educators and other people, if we can use continuous visibility as a way to monitor both in peacetime and wartime, and do all those four pillars, implement that would be the way to succeed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This one is from Ivan Ruiz to Dr. Cole. What's the strategy to de-risk digitization and advanced analytics while systematically identifying, understanding, and mitigating the associated risks?
A big part of it is understanding and prioritizing what data and information is most critical to you. One of the good parts is we have more data and more information available to us. There's so many logs, there's so many records, there's so much information that we can do analytics and correlation on. The problem is it's almost too much. With most organizations, they are catching attacks. The issue is they're generating 100 alerts a day and their team can only handle 10. So what we need to do as security professionals is focus in on the quality of the data and correlation and the quality of the outputs. Instead of generating 100 alerts, let's only generate 5 or 6 of the most critical, do a better job prioritizing so our team can actually focus in on the alerts that are most impactful.
Excellent, thank you. This next one from Al Lacroix. How do small businesses with limited resources respond to cyber attacks? Excellent question. Paul, can you take that one first?
I think it's really about prioritization. I think picking up from what Eric said, it's really thinking hard about what are your mission critical, your business critical assets, and what are you really concerned about? Thinking about what is the worst case scenario for you, and really investing in that, and thinking about the right approach and the right tools, and maybe don't just follow the herd, don't just do what everybody else is doing and buying the same tools. Take a bit of a step back and think about alternative solutions. I mean, that's very much what we're trying to do. We're trying to address the gaps that are underserved in current solutions and try and fill those. So understand your risk, and then take a really good look at the solutions that are available and that are out there.
Excellent, thank you. And this next one's very interesting. I would love Anil's perspective on this, and then I'd love Dr. Cole's perspective on it as well. with the dramatic increase in the number of cyber attacks in recent years, protecting organizations is something that many companies are trying to do. How is what Netscout is doing different? And Neil, could we hear first from you, please?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think maybe just add to the previous question also with Eric answered. We have a lot of data, but I call it accidental data. That was not created to generate cybersecurity alarm. Logs were there to protect, to debug the DNS server or something. So that information that doesn't necessarily result in the proactive alarming and other things. So what Netscout is doing differently is we are using the traffic data on the network in real time to run DPI to create some conclusions and generate. So we have really the fingerprint, and one of the traffic which is there is the hackers traffic going to the server. So we have real-time visible to actual data rather than just logs or like fixed signatures. We are using anomalies of performance based on actual data. In a way, we are treating the patient, not just the disease. And we are customized to that organization with our product. And that's what the big difference is. And I believe, Philippa, as Eric and I had talked about it, this approach has either not been tried because people didn't have a passion for this, or they didn't have the technology. And that was the case for Netscout 20 years ago. But now we have that. But now we also find this was an interesting area for him to get into. So all these stars lined up over the last 18 months. And that's the Netscout difference.
Dr. Cole, love to hear your perspective on that too.
Yeah, to me, what I love about the approach that Netscout is taking is they started off understanding the network. They really started off as an IT software vendor that understands IT, correlates IT, and can detect and look for the anomalies that are happening on the network. They then brilliantly said, wait a second, this information and what we're doing is so valuable and is exactly what's needed in cybersecurity to increase visibility and detection, that they basically took that core technology and applied it in the cybersecurity space, in which it was a perfect match for catching those attackers. Most products out there are not able to give you the visibility, do the traceback, come back to the zero source of an attack, because Netscout has been around for a long time and they've built up these skills and techniques. They're a very mature company bringing that mature solution to cybersecurity.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and get through as many of these as I can. You've made this seem very straightforward, using network packet data to identify security threats. If that's the case, why don't more security tools leverage this type of data to do what they do? Paul, should we ask you this one?
So just to give an example, it's because we've been doing it a long time, and I'm going to be honest, it's not easy to do this at modern network speeds and in multi-cloud environments. I'll just give people a little thought experiment. You know, our probes, for example, work at 10 and 40 gigabits per second. That's a 10 with 9 zeros after it. We process bits of information, that many bits of information every second. And as Neil said, we're doing DPI, deep packet inspection, and we're doing that for every packet. It takes a lot of experience and a lot of technology to do that.
Dr. Cole or Neil, do you want to respond to that as well?
Let me just add one thing. I think we have a lot of smart people in our company, just like many other companies. We're just doing it for a long time. I think it's as simple. It just we are building on a platform which is carrier scale, and we have all the Fortune 500 companies, or most of them, and all the top carriers in the world already using this solution. And as Paul gave, one dimension of scale. And we have bought 7-8 companies in the DPI space, and we have been able to retain all the experts and talent from this company, Paul included. We acquired his company in 2011, and we have been able to keep them and excited about this. So I think we have a passion for solving problem. We have the resources of a big company, And we have proven it in some other area, and we got lucky into thinking, hey, this is a new area we can get to, which solves big problem with actually a relatively small effort.
Excellent, thank you. I think this will be our final question, but I'd love to come to each of you on this question because it seems to sort of get to the nub of what we've been talking about today. And it doesn't have a name, unfortunately, but thank you for the question. I think everyone would agree that both detection and prevention is needed, not one or the other. But are you saying focus on detection instead? Dr. Cole, can we start with you, please?
No, I completely agree you need both, but what I'm saying is for the last 15 years, most companies have focused on prevention. You're really good at that, right? You do a good job with it. Keep doing that. And now put all your new energy and effort on augmenting detection. You need both, but if we had to look at it in most companies, prevention is a B+ and detection is an F-. So if that's the grade you're getting in school, logic would tell you, put more energy and effort into the F- to bring it up, but also put enough energy and effort to maintain the B+. So you need both. I'm not saying ignore prevention, but most companies are much more mature. So now it's time to overemphasize the detection to catch it up.
Excellent. Paul?
I think you can think of detection as part of prevention. So as Erica said, you're never going to stop people getting in, but what you can do with good detection is prevent or control how far they progress. And that in a way is a way of tackling prevention.
Excellent, thank you. And Anil, last word to you.
Yeah, so I will just add to what Paul and Eric said, maybe another dimension to this. A lot of time when I look at it, the expense and risk, especially the expense on any project, is either additive or it's a multiplier. So when you reduce the cost of the cybersecurity solution, not only just reduce the risk, but the cost. If you keep doing more and more prevention, is additive. And it's a losing proposition, because every time you add one more thing for prevention, you are actually adding to the cost without and incrementally, but not making up in terms of the risk reduction. But if you use detection as a prerequisite to prevention, it's a multiplying force. And we have adequate B+ or B-. And if we can make that, this is a multiplying force. And that's why I feel that detection, smart detection or detection, is going to actually reduce, multiply, make your prevention even better.
Excellent, brilliant answers. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're out of time, unfortunately, for Q&A, but Dr. Cole, Anil, Paul, thank you so much for your time and your insights today and for sharing your intelligence into how to prepare, detect, and respond to cyber attacks and how to educate future generations. We really appreciate it. And also a big thank you to all of you for watching and attending today's event and for your excellent questions. And a big thank you to Netscout for sponsoring today's session. A quick word to the audience. You should see a survey at the top right of your screen when you click on the bell icon for notifications. Please take a moment to share your thoughts. We would love to hear from you. And to everybody, have a great and safe rest of your day. Clear.